If you're like me, you go through an identity crisis every couple of months. On the menu today at Sarah's Soju Cafe is barley tea, so grab your mugs and let's chat about personal identity and branding. Hello, welcome back, Soju Shotties, to another episode of Soju with Sarah. I'm your host, Sarah, and today we are doing a fun episode. This is barley tea, and I haven't had barley tea in a while, but it's non-caffeinated, I think. Maybe I'll find out later, but I've had this before in other episodes, and I think it's a nice warm drink. I think we are sticking to the dry winter we're having, as in not drinking any alcohol despite being called Soju with Sarah, but I have barley tea and it'll be a cozy episode today. So cheers. So today's episode, I wanted to talk about something that I've really only started reflecting on very actively in the last 2 years, which is personal identity and personal branding, in quotes. I put it in quotes because ideally I think personal branding and personal identity should be the same thing, but nowadays with social media and other influences, I feel like they're very completely separate things. Also, separately, I just feel like there's so much online discourse nowadays about how important it is to have good personal branding and how intentional you have to be about it. So today I wanted to sit down and talk about all that, because if you're like me, you go through an identity crisis every couple of months, and I feel like I've been in a perpetual state of identity crisis the last few years, and we'll get into why I feel that way. But I think it's very important to have these conversations because a lot of us probably feel like victims to overconsumption and social media and just cultural shifts that kind of cause us to feel a sense of loss when it comes to our own personal identities. So grab your mugs, and one day we will have literal soju mugs that you guys can grab. But grab your mugs and let's chat about personal identity, online perception, a sprinkle of the superficial stuff, and what it means to have good personal branding. So firstly, I think there's a very important distinction to make when it comes to personal identity and personal branding, because personal identity or self-image is the intrinsic things that you see in yourself. It is literally the internal way you feel about yourself and your own identity. And personal identity basically makes up who you are. But on the flip side, I think personal branding is very external and extrinsic. Personal branding is more of who you present yourself as. And like I mentioned, oftentimes they're separate. Ideally, they would be the same thing so that it's easier for you as a person to navigate. But because there's so many different factors that come into play, including our phones and social media and influencer culture, it's very, very hard to have personal branding be the exact same as personal identity. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this today is because I think I've been in a constant state of identity crisis, and this kind of got re-incited for me because one of my friends told me recently, it's not surprising that you became the content creator of the friend group because you've always had such a strong identity and a very unique style. And it hit me that in the last 4-ish years, I feel like I've been slowly losing my personal identity when it comes to who I am at my core. And I think it shows in different ways that I feel like I don't dress the way I necessarily want to, or dress the way that I feel most confident and most proud. And I feel like I don't express myself as much as I used to, and I don't participate in all the creative, cool things that I used to do when I was in college. I think I have mentioned this in other episodes, but in college, I did so much more creative stuff. I spent this whole summer doing a tech internship, but at the same time, after work, I'd come home and do one graphic design a day because I wanted to learn how to use Photoshop and all the principles of graphic design. And I think that energy that I had for all these things that made up who I was and my identity back then, I've kind of slowly lost because of life priorities and also what I see other people doing. Side note, I also think this is a really interesting topic for me to dive into because most of the time when I bring up topics on the podcast, it's something that I've given myself time to really think through and maybe like resolve in my life, or at least I'm working through and finding solutions for. But I know for a fact that in therapy for the last 2 years, I've in passing mentioned like, oh, I feel like I'm losing my sense of self and I feel like I don't have a strong identity anymore. But I somehow never have gotten around to addressing it because something else is more prominent in my life. And so, yeah, this is like the first time that I'm sitting down and actually vocalizing a lot of my thoughts about my own identity. Maybe this resonates, maybe this doesn't, but I hope that it's insightful in a way. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about is overconsumption. And I think this is probably on the list of things that have influenced my lack of self-identity in the last few years. This is probably one of the top reasons. It's very intuitive. Like you can probably know why exactly this happens, but I am chronically online nowadays, and I don't think I go a day without checking my phone multiple times and going on social media. And it's even worse because my hobbies now lie in social media and sharing online and creating videos and creating podcast episodes. But comparing to how much I used social media when I was a kid, this is so many times more than that. And I find it really conflicting how I feel about the rise of social media because I love to be plugged in. I love to be in the know of things going on in culture and feeling like I have a space online. But at the same time, my opinions get so heavily swayed nowadays. And I don't think the overconsumption of social media has led to an overconsumption of spending in my life. Like my spending habits have stayed relatively consistent, which I'm grateful for. But I do feel the sense that my personal taste and my preferences for things has become so scattered in the last couple of years. And going back to when I felt like I had a really strong identity, and when my friend was telling me she felt like I had a strong identity, I think that was in the period that I wasn't over consuming social media. And so nowadays, when I look at things that I used to very actively think were ugly, like certain types of skirts and low-rise jeans, I look at it nowadays on my own feed and through videos that people make, and I'm getting swayed very easily. And I look at these like bell bottoms and think, that actually is so cute. And that's not to slander low-rise jeans and bell bottoms, but I think it's just that I no longer feel a strong opinion around what I'm wearing because there's so many trends and creators and videos to consume around just one thing. And I also feel a lot of pressure to like things nowadays because it is trendy. And for example, I feel like the bows came back. There was a huge rise in bows, and I think my personal style has never been that girly, but suddenly like last year I had this huge fascination with bows like everyone else did in the fashion girly community. And I found it so interesting because in the past I never leaned that way. But the biggest thing that I noticed is when I fall into these little trend buckets and I succumb to different trends that are popular at the time. First of all, I end up buying things that I never wear. But second of all, I end up trying trends and trying things where I'll be happy when I look at myself in the mirror, but then I walk out the door and I go to a social event and I suddenly feel very uncomfortable because it is just objectively not my taste, or it doesn't look good on me, or it really doesn't fit my energy and my vibe. So when I think about bows, whenever I wear something with bows on it, especially on my hair or on my body, I feel slightly uncomfortable. Like I don't think it looks like my vibe, and then I get very in my head, and then I suddenly am like not very confident when I'm at these parties and social functions. I do love bows though. Like I will wear it in moderation, but I just think that's a great example of how falling into these overconsumption cycles of trends and social media causes you to lose a sense of your own knowing, like your own knowing of what you look best in and like what you like the most. And that is also why I think there's so many things I used to think looked so bad on me, or that I would never wear, or that I actively just disliked, and how that suddenly becomes something that I'm considering buying or considering trying out. And it's just like this weird dynamic of people starting to conform to the masses, and when you don't conform, you feel weird. But I think there is a whole discussion around sustainable practices when following trends and when consuming social media and being influenced by influencers that we can dive into another time. And I don't want to put all the blame on social media. Obviously, social media is one factor to it. I also think in the last couple of years, there's been other elements of my life that don't always have full alignment with personal identity. And I do a lot of this processing when I'm on my way to work, because when I dress for work, I know I've put out videos before in the past where I'm showing my work outfits and they're really cute. But a lot of the times when I'm going to work, I'm actually in sweats, or I wear whatever is on the chair of clothes that I have, like my mountain of clothes, and I end up feeling like I'm not really dressing for myself, but I'm just dressing for the situation, which is I need to sit at a desk for 8 hours and be working. And so I feel like I lose a lot of my self-identity when it comes to having to go to work and having to do different things in life where I don't really have the opportunity to express myself. Work's an interesting discussion too, because I feel like for a lot of people, myself included, I don't ever feel like I can 100% be myself at work. I'm grateful enough that my teammates and people that I work with, I really enjoy spending time with and talking to them. But there's certain parts of my life where I also kind of shield away from when it comes to talking about who I am at work. And for example, if I talk about anything creative and artistic or my YouTube videos, it feels a little bit like I'm forcing a conversation around something that I like that maybe other people don't really understand. The weird thing that happens when you get older and you're an adult and in different situations like work and professional stuff especially, where I feel like you can't fully self-express because there's not much alignment with maybe the place that you're at versus who you are and what exactly you want to say. And I think that kind of pushes you towards maybe dampening your own identity a little bit. I think about sometimes my friends who used to curse a lot, but after starting their professional life and everything, they've picked up like corporate lingo and they don't really curse that much. They're kind of more like toned down. Not that cursing should be a big part of your identity, but I do think when you're at a job for 8 hours a day, it's really, really easy to lose who you are because you're busy working, or you don't really want to show exactly who you are to your coworkers. And sometimes it is just a little bit awkward, you know, to like bring up your hobbies or talk so passionately about something when it's not around other people who are equally as passionate. And so that's something I've been doing some reflecting on recently, which is how much work shifts my self-image and the way that I like to present myself, because I feel like I don't have that opportunity at work to really, really express who I want to be. And if you are someone who is working a job where you're around other people or working corporate, I'm curious to hear if you guys also have the same experience where you kind of withhold a little bit about yourself or a little bit of yourself to your coworkers and how that impacts you. I also think the next point that I want to make is sometimes it is just hard to find alignment between who you are in the current moment versus who you want to be in the future. And the reason is any sort of change in life requires time and it requires patience. And so when you're in the process of getting to where you want to be and like building your identity and maybe your personal brand, there's this weird phase where you have to slowly transition your lifestyle, your self-image, your self-worth, and like slowly build up to it. One of the tips that I heard about rebranding yourself or like repositioning your mindset about yourself that I thought was really helpful is that you should always imagine yourself in your final state and in your end state. Like even if you're moving towards your goal, you should always envision it and visualize it so that you keep yourself motivated on the journey to becoming your better self. And I also think that helps with consistency, because finding alignment and working towards this alignment requires a lot of consistency, which people talk about all the time. And consistency is notoriously hard. But the next big reason I think I've slowly lost the sense of identity, and also now tying into what personal branding is I think that life as a creator influences you a lot in terms of diluting who you are. If you think about the nature of being a content creator and being constantly present online, you kind of fall victim to what the algorithm prefers. And so as a creator, I think early on, I was always taught to chase trends, which I've learned to stop doing as much, because in the process of chasing trends and creating videos, your focus gets shifted from what types of videos do I want to make? What are some things that I would be proud to show the world to what is going to get me the highest number of views, what are people going to like watching, what has the most potential to go viral. And I felt this the most because when I first started off, I really didn't know what types of videos to make when I was trying to be a content creator. And so I remember I would find videos that other creators had done and also model those videos off of the personalities and the editing styles and everything of the most popular creators at that time. I remember the top ones back when I was still building out my channel and building out my online presence were Best Dressed, Kelly Stamps, Katie Yu. And I remember there was just misalignment on who I was versus these other creators because I'm a very like calm and a little bit like soft-spoken when it comes to my real life presence. But then I remember I was modeling my behaviors after all of these very extroverted, fun, bubbly creators. And I remember I would speak so loudly and so fast. But I remember this pursuit of virality and like wanting to get views and wanting to be like these popular creators led me to act in a way that wasn't really aligned with who I actually was. And so my hot take is if you're not careful as a creator, you can very easily be desensitized to your own identity. And I think this now ties into the idea of personal branding because like I mentioned, ideally identity and personal branding would be the same thing, and how you feel on the inside is how you come off to other people. But online, I feel like I've seen so many videos nowadays where someone will be telling me it's really important to have a strong personal branding so that you can get opportunities in life and that a following is really important to have nowadays. And I feel like personal branding has become this tool. Like it no longer is about perception and authenticity and how genuine you are. It's more a tool that you can leverage for opportunity and for viewership and to convert to like a business or something like that. And it makes me kind of sad because I used to think that as long as you show up authentically online and that you're genuine about who you are online, that's all that matters when it comes to being online and sharing your life. But more and more nowadays, I feel like there's strategy and skill and techniques behind personal branding, and that it's evolving to be this very highly curated thing. And that in itself pushes it further and further away from your personal identity. And the reason that I brought this up is because I think part of why I feel the sense of loss when it comes to my personal identity is because nowadays, when I think about my online presence and being a content creator, I feel like I have to really strategize and I really have to think about like storyline, narrative, and that I can't just show up and be myself, and that I have to really think through what I'm sharing and what I'm withholding. And that's the other thing, which is I don't really like to withhold things, but I think when it comes to having a strong personal brand nowadays, you have to think about what you don't want people to see and what you don't want to share about your life. And so in my personal life, I internalize that as something that now I ignore. I think an example of that is online. I have a very strong community of people who are in tech because I do make career vlogs and I do share my work week. And then when it comes to sharing other things that I'm interested in, like pottery or fashion and that creative side, I almost feel not legit. An example that I can share here, because this is a safe space, is I used to do a lot of beauty, fashion, DIY sewing videos, and I kind of stopped doing that because life got really busy once I moved back to New York City, and I focused a lot of my energy on making career and work-related vlogs and videos because that was what my life was consumed by at that time. But because in that process, I naturally just withheld a lot of this other side of my life, the fashion and the beauty and the DIY stuff, I feel not legitimate nowadays when I put out videos of that sort. Like when I put out fashion videos, I'm always in the back of my head like, oh, I'm not stylish because I don't put videos online about fashion and other things like that. So I'm not a legitimate fashion creator, and therefore I'm not as stylish. And it's such a weird train of thought because as much as I would have had a strong identity in my fashion taste and things that I like in my personal taste, it has gone diluted because I don't share online. And I think this reliance on like social media validation to validate your personal identity is so unhealthy and so toxic. But it's really hard to shed when you're chronically online and when you're chronically sharing. And see the validation come in. So that's just one thing. The other thing, which is more superficial, is when you're a content creator, you also do start getting things like PR and free clothes and free wonderful things, like wonderful perks as a content creator. I do think it leads to overconsumption, which is one problem. But I also think that the other problem is that you start wearing things that you wouldn't have gone out and bought yourself. And I recently actually did a closet purge, and that's what made me realize this. Is I have so many things in my closet that I just ended up donating the other day, but those are things that I had gone through PR boxes, through all the hauls I used to do, and I've worn them maybe once, maybe sometimes never. And I've since stopped doing like those haul videos and other types of videos where I'm over consuming. I do brand deals once in a while, but most of the time I only take on brand deals where I love the brand and I would wear their stuff anyways. I think I had this massive realization that amongst the pieces of clothes that I had curated for myself was an equally as big pile of clothes that I wouldn't wear, that takes up all this physical space and takes up all my mental bandwidth when it comes to picking out an outfit. And I realized that that is one side of content creation that I don't necessarily enjoy as much as I used to. Because back in the day, if I was getting free clothes, I would be so amazed and I'd be like, of course I would want like a free jacket. But nowadays, I don't think I want to take on things if I don't think I would actually wear it and if I think it doesn't align with my personal style. And I also no longer want to feed into this consumption cycle that creators, I think, do feed into. I do still take on PR boxes, but I turn down PR nowadays when I don't think I would use it. And then the last thing is I feel like when you're online and you're chronically online and you're sharing, you start making decisions for other people and you start self-expressing in ways where you think people would be most receptive towards. And even like the way I talk, like the tone of how I speak, if you go to a lot of my earlier videos, they're all not me. Like they all sound like some variation of who was popular at that time. And I find it funny because in like the vlogging space, there's different people that have been popular through the years, but you can kind of tell what era each vlogger got inspired by, because the most popular vlogger in 2020 was definitely very different from the most popular vlogger in like 2016. And the tone of voice that people use to talk, they're always reflective of like the era. And so I think we're in like the soft girl era right now, where people are really quiet and gentle and demure. And I think I definitely have videos where I'm like super peaceful, super calm, but nowadays I have like random jokes that James and I will have in my vlogs. But yeah, I think just outputting content, you start rewiring your like identity to what other people are doing and what you think people would like to watch. And I think that's really unhealthy. I think when it comes to forming your own identity, it should never be all about what other people want. And the last reason I'm having an identity crisis is because I think life gets in the way and everyone has to go through life. It's a very common experience. But if you think about life as like a mailbox, you start getting mail and you start emptying your mail, and those are kind of representing like the responsibilities that you have in life. But sometimes you don't empty the box all the way through. Maybe you just read a couple of letters, and then sometimes you forget to empty the box, and then suddenly your box starts overflowing and it's really hard to clear out because there's just so much mail in it. And when it comes to personal identity, I think that's one of the responsibilities you have to yourself that kind of gets pushed down by all this extra mail and all the new responsibilities that you have in your life. I think about how it's really easy for me to form my identity in earlier stages of my life when I didn't have as much responsibility. Like, for example, in college, when my only responsibility was taking care of myself, having a good education, making friends, enjoying my period of college life, and also finding a job and like finding a boyfriend. But nowadays, I feel like my identity gets deprioritized every single week, on top of doing taxes and filling out random forms, going to the doctors, going to work, cooking for yourself. I think I barely have time to think about who I want to be and how to brand myself online, how to be intentional about who I am and like sharing myself with myself and like to other people. It's just a lot of work that gets buried under other things. I also think because life gets in the way of forming your own identity, certain things are happening. And I think this is like small things that happen to everyone. You start reaching for clothes that are just in your plain field of field of vision. Just you start reaching for clothes that maybe you put out a couple of days ago, and you start repeating your outfits because you don't have time to pick out a nice outfit or even to put on makeup and present well. And you start losing those opportunities to like share who you are and express yourself through things like dressing well and putting on makeup and exploring your sense of makeup and exploring your sense of style, because all you're going to do for the rest of the day is work. And I think that's a big thing, that in building up all my responsibilities in life, I've kind of let go of a little bit of my commitment to myself. Those are the reasons why I think I've kind of lost a little bit of myself in the last few years. I think the biggest impact that it's had on a whole, but one, I think I'm just less confident when I don't feel like I'm being intentional about myself, and when I don't feel like I have a strong sense of my own identity. I question myself a lot more when it comes to how people perceive me, how I feel about myself, and it's very easy for me to go down a spiral of who am I? Like I think the broader question with all of this is, who are you and who do you come off as? And I think when you don't have a strong sense of self, it's constant. You'll constantly be questioning yourself on these two things, and it gets harder and harder to figure out who you are. I think the second thing is you start feeling less special in a way, and you don't have to be special in life, but I think there's small things that make us who we are, and I feel like I haven't given care and attention to those things the last few years. Creativity is one of them. Makeup is one of them. I used to experiment with makeup a lot, and I have a lot of makeup, but I just always put on the same eyeliner, eyebrows, blush. I never allow myself the liberty to experiment and do other things because I just don't have time. And I feel like I've been losing the feeling that I have when I'm really invested in the things I like and the things that I enjoy. I lose this sort of enjoyment of life because I'm not really doing the things that I want to do. But some things that I reflected on recently with the not feeling so special anymore is I feel like my apartment has also lost traces of what made me back then. And if you go back to my life 2 years ago when I was living with my roommate and I had my one room that I had to kind of decorate, it embodied me so much more than I feel like my apartment does now. As much as I love my apartment, it's so cute and quaint. I think there was more character in my first apartment room, and I think it's because I was intentional about what I was putting in there. Nowadays, when it comes to furnishing my apartment, it's functional. Like, it's very functional. I get a lot of shelving so that we can have more spaces to store things. I have my plants that I do love, but I feel like even my love of plants, which I had this whole stint of loving plants, I have kind of let go of because of different responsibilities. And not gonna shade Moose, but Moose is partly why I converted from being a plant mom to a cat mom. I think in cat parenting and his whole journey with FIP, I didn't have any time to cater to my plants. So I kind of lost that spark in my life, like my interest in plants. But the last way that I think this identity crisis manifests is I feel like I'm always constantly changing and I'm never 100% happy with my present self. And I hope this section isn't too negative. This is just literally me brain dumping all my thoughts around self-identity and my self-image recently. What this does mean, though, is that I want to make a very active effort in changing this one concern and thing that is ailing me. And I think when you go through an identity crisis and you start feeling like you don't know who you are anymore, there are so many steps that you can take to bring yourself back. And I think for me, that's one of my pre-resolutions and resolutions going into 2025, which is figuring out who I am again and what my interests are, and allowing myself the freedom to explore and express. And so this next section is going to be about how to actually do that. So I wrote this down earlier today when I was thinking about this episode, but this is my 5-step plan to building back my personal identity and self-image. And the first one is to actively engage in and track my personal taste. And the keyword is actively because I think it's very easy to passively engage in things like trends and developing personal taste. And by that, I mean participating in all this social media consumption and forming your personal taste off of social media trends. Something that I've been doing a lot more recently is pinning things I like on Pinterest and actually searching up the things that are interesting to me. I've been very much into knitwear recently, and I feel like in the past I would have probably been scrolling on my social media and bookmark a lot of things that I see on social media, but I've been trying to go to Pinterest more recently and search up things that I'm thinking about actively rather than passively. And I think it's been helping because when I have my mood boards on Pinterest, I can actually filter through all the things that I've saved and see how coherent my preferences are versus on social media. It's just scattered. Like I save knitting videos and pottery videos, and it's hard for me to go back and kind of like synthesize what my personal taste is. But yeah, if you're a Pinterest user, you probably know the obsession Pinterest is great. I think for this specific step, I mainly just wanted to say that it's really important to actively engage in your personal taste and actively curate what you like so that you have a better sense of the superficials and what you like around that. The second thing that I'm really trying to work on is making your personal identity more visible and more seen. And going back to the example of when I wake up for work, I just grab whatever is on the counter that I wore the day before or like 2 days before. It's really, really easy to go for what is convenient and what is right in your face. And a lot of the times, if we're not intentional about it, that means that we're reaching for things that don't necessarily represent us in the best way possible. And so one thing I'm trying to be intentional about is making those habits seen. And this is like a productivity tip that I'm somehow translating into like a life tip, is that if you want to self-express and you want to share your identity and have it be more of an organic part of your life, to make it more seen. So maybe instead of having sweats out in the open during the week while I'm picking stuff out to wear for work, maybe I have some nice clothes out in the open, like not in the closet, but bringing it out so that I reach for that instead of reaching for something that I feel like would dilute my self-identity. I think another way that you can feel more like yourself and like form more of your identity is to build the world around you the way that you want to be, because as much as self-identity and self-image is about how you feel on the inside, it's also the things on the outside that make you feel that particular way. And I've noticed too in the past when I make friends that are very aligned or kind of embody who I want to be, I naturally start becoming like them, whether it's through my fashion taste or my behaviors and different things like that. I think as humans, we absorb our external environment and the people around us in ways that we probably don't even process. And I think that creating the environment and space and habits around who you want to be is very valuable. The next step is to do frequent check-ins with yourself where you're mentally and physically purging. And to break that down, I think it's very important to constantly check in with yourself and think about the things that you do and don't like. Purge the things in your brain and mind that you don't like the self-talk that is maybe negative, the self-talk that you don't like hearing, the self-talk that kind of brings you down and like tells you, oh, don't wear that because people are going to think you look ugly in it. So bringing that down and having these check-ins where you're telling yourself to stop thinking about the negatives, but also to do the physical purging, which is going through maybe your home, your closet, your life, and figuring out what things to take out, because it is either dampening your sense of self-identity, it's distracting you from finding your own identity, or maybe it's just not something that you care for anymore. And I think having done a closet clean out recently, that really helped me realize how much my personal taste has been heavily influenced by all these pieces that I don't wear anymore. And just slowly getting rid of that and doing that physical and mental purge, I think is a great exercise. And I think with purging, it's really important to be super critical and looking at things and actively making decisions about how you feel. So for me, when I did the closet purge, I looked at my pieces of clothing that I was considering throwing away and really processing like which pieces I got because it's trendy versus which pieces I actually would value in my closet. I think that's just a good exercise to do, whether it is in your head or in real life, trying to purge things that have a detrimental effect on you, your self-image, or your personal identity. The next step, which is more hard to do, is to limit your social media time and limit doom scrolling. Overconsumption becomes so easy when you're always seeing what other people are wearing, always getting recommended things. And it is really hard to say to just completely go off of social media. So I think one of the things that I do is I am intentional about which things I scroll past and which things I no longer consume on social media. One of them is I hate TikTok shop. Like I really, really hate getting recommended products and being pushed to buy things that I don't need. And so I almost always just scroll past it when I see it on my For You page. I think there's just so much fluff that is on social media when it comes to materialism, overconsumption, and all that. And so I think I've been more intentional about finding creators who are authentic, vulnerable, and really align with my personal values and like my personal taste and things that I enjoy and that I would want to see. And so yeah, I think that's a very important step in this journey of rediscovering yourself. And then the last tip, which I think this might be a bonus tip, maybe it's not, is I think that it's very, very crucial to experiment. A lot of self-identity is formed after trying different things out and figuring out what you like and what you don't like. So in periods where you don't allow yourself the opportunity to try things out, it's also a period where it's really easy to lose who you are. And so whether that is trying different hobbies and seeing if you're, a chess girly or if you're a running girly, it's really important to try it so you know if you are. But even for things like how you dress, trying out different styles and trying out different makeup and trying out different ways of like presenting yourself. And even one last thing is even trying out different communities of people gives you a sense of where you feel belonging and where you see yourself aligning the most. And a lot of identity is also formed, like I mentioned, by the people around you. So experimentation and stepping past your comfort zone and trying different things, I think, is the last step. So I hope this was an insightful conversation about identity. I apologize if it got a little bit negative in the middle, but hopefully we're all working towards improving our own self-image and quote unquote personal branding. I think we didn't really get to talk that much about personal branding this time, but I think what's really important is that we form a strong sense of personal identity, find fulfillment in how we self-express who we are and how we show up in the world. And yeah, so I hope this episode was insightful. If you guys enjoyed it, feel free to leave a comment, a like, or a follow, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.